Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman. Our next guest joining us is Valerie Sussman, legal counsel for philanthropy and nonprofit sector with Hurwit and Associates. Welcome to Radio Entrepreneurs.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me today.
Hey, it's a pleasure to see you again. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your firm and what Hurwit and Associates does and where you guys focus?
Sure, absolutely. So Hurwit and Associates, we have kind of a long history of serving all types of nonprofit organizations. And our founder, Jeff Hurwit, he actually worked at the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts. So he has this background sort of from the regulatory perspective, as well as in his work for a nonprofit organization. So he's sort of seen the sector from both sides, and we kind of use that to inform our practice. You know, we really think about the needs of nonprofits, all of the regulatory needs that they may have. We also think about their areas of growth. So things like mission shift, what they want to do in the future, as well as, of course, all of the nonprofit startup, as well as dissolution items. So we handle basically a really wide array of nonprofit matters.
So nonprofits represent a huge segment of the marketplace. I think we sort of lose sight of that, in the grand scheme. Obviously in difficult economies, our attention turns a little bit towards nonprofits, and they come in all shapes and sizes. And you guys work with groups that are from conception, beginning of formation, all the way up through large established nonprofits. So tell us, if you will, inform our listeners, for those people that are sitting out there saying, I got a great idea. What's sort of the genesis of developing an idea and working and making a decision to, I guess, establish a nonprofit? Where does it start for that, person who has a thought?
Absolutely. That's such a great question. So, a lot of it has to do with thinking about the mission. So that would be sort of first and foremost, what are you trying to do and who are you trying to help? So once you have that in place, we can definitely work through ideas there. It's also thinking about certain factors that will affect the legal formation. So for example, do you want to assist individuals abroad, or is your activity going to be focused solely in the US? Or, are you going to be primarily a grant-making organization, sort of giving to other charities that are in existence? Or are you going to be doing a lot of programs yourself and have sort of the structure and groundwork to do that? And then lastly, one really important initial item is just thinking about that board of directors, sort of, who can you pick and what are their different skill sets? So we try to talk through all the various, governance issues that arise at the beginning of an organization's life. But the main goal is to really help you figure out, what's going to be the most time efficient, tax advantageous way to make the impact that you want to make.
So are there different, you mentioned structures, are there different structures for nonprofits, depending on, as you said, are they a organization that's going to be providing funding to others, or are they going to be delivering goods and services of their own? Is that a distinction that how the organization is structured based on that?
Yeah, well, there are different types of ways to organize these. So some of it has to do with governance, and some of it has to do with, more of the mission and structure. So in terms of types of organizations, some folks prefer to form a public charity. Those can be a little bit more tax advantageous from a donor perspective in terms of, deductibility. And so that really goes to, what is the mission of the organization? Is the board of directors representative of the general public? And we also talk about something called the public support test, which organizations may have to meet over a period of time. So we kind of go over all the different options. Public charity is one option. Certainly some individuals may choose to form a private foundation, especially if they want to keep the mission a little bit more close to home and perhaps family focused. Perhaps they want to have a family-centered board of directors to really make sure they maintain a certain level of control over the organization. So all of those factors are what we take into account when we decide the entity type with a client.
So, and I know, I hope this is a reasonable question, but, what do we see in this country? Because we've obviously heard over the last couple of years with the pandemic that there's been a lot of wealth creation, a lot of families that have, very wealthy individuals who have created even greater wealth. Are we seeing an increase in establishing foundations? And is there a whole ecosystem of sorts that exists that realm of the market where people say, they reach out to their peers and say, hey, you guys have a family foundation. I want to do the same. I want to do good. How does that world sort of operate? And what do we, as people that are not engaged in it? What do we need to know about how that happens?
Absolutely. Well, at least in my own individual practice, I've definitely seen an increase in clients coming to us with some ideas. Perhaps their friends, have formed a foundation and they want to do something similar. We actually just had a client who thought about, there was a sports tournament that they had, that a friend of theirs was running as a charitable organization, and they decided, they wanted to do something in honor of their family member who had passed away, to do similar types of work. So yeah, we definitely see that trend, individuals seeing others doing good in the world, coming to us and saying, hey, what can we do here? Is it wise to form a nonprofit organization or to keep running this organization in a different way? So we definitely see that a lot. And I would say even with the COVID impact, we originally thought perhaps, people would be less charitably inclined. Obviously certain folks are suffering in terms of, what's going on in their families and around the world, and potentially, with their income as well. But we have noticed, at least in our sector, there's been sort of an increased desire to give charitably. And we've had to, sort of help folks kind of think about that mission and what they can do right now to make a positive impact in the world.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that I see often are these feel-good news stories, and obviously the tragedy part typically isn't a feel-good, but what families do after suffering some sort of tragedy, and it seems to me that it's quite commonplace today to have a GoFundMe initiative that starts after some sort of tragedy, and I would say, and I'm not a huge consumer of television news, but almost every time I tune in, I see one of these feel-good stories of the family took tragedy and created a GoFundMe page, and next thing you know, they have a foundation that's set up. Is that something that you're seeing more of, because there are vehicles to be able to accelerate funding and to raise funds for these things? And I guess the second part of that question is, are those people that typically do their homework first, or they jump in and then figure out after the fact, and does that create complication?
Also great questions. Yes, we definitely do find, especially with GoFundMe, you're not really getting the benefits, potential tax benefits that you could get with a charitable organization. So, certainly there are people who start with GoFundMe and then say, wait a minute, we could be doing this differently. This project is sort of really growing and people are really interested in making contributions. So then they sort of, might come to us and say, okay, how do we do this? What are other people doing? And, in addition to the foundation trend, definitely there are folks who want to use a donor advised fund. That's become sort of an increasingly popular way of giving charitably. We sort of advise them about the advantages and disadvantages of that. But sort of to go to your second question, I do feel people are really doing their research. So our clients usually do come to us. The internet is full of information about charitable organizations. And, sometimes that can be great and they learn a lot and they come to us very well informed. Other times, perhaps, they've drafted some documents, they need a little assistance because perhaps, they filed something before the IRS through, a certain legal service, and maybe, there's sort of edits that have to be made before the IRS will accept that. So then they come to our help sort of further down in the process. So basically, it's totally fine to come to an attorney with no idea of what you want to do, but it's also fine to do some research, and it's always great when clients are well informed.
Just following up on that theme, it's mind-boggling to me how people in the midst of grief can figure out how to set up a GoFundMe page and raise, tons of money. And I don't know how they've navigated through what their organization is actually going to do, other than, taking something tragic and turning it into something positive. So I would imagine in those cases, they would be well advised to sort of do things correctly from not only a tax advantage perspective, but there's a lot of compliance in the nonprofit world, correct? There's a lot of government oversight and
absolutely things. So yeah, you do have those ongoing, tax filings, and at least in Massachusetts, you also have some attorney general oversight over charities, which a lot of folks aren't aware of. So, one of the great things about Hurwit is we also have a lot of expertise with the other attorneys and paralegals in keeping those ongoing filings maintained. So a lot of our clients will come to us, sort of leave it in our hands to kind of, keep things going past the initial formation, make sure they're meeting all their deadlines, so that, especially if they've gone through a terrible situation or dealing with grief, they don't have to also be concerned, with making sure that all of these ongoing compliance and filing requirements are met.
In a sort of macro question, I guess, do you see in your practice sort of the trends that exist in traditional industries with nonprofits, where there's a lot of mergers, consolidation of organizations, and is that a very different and complicated affair within the nonprofit world?
That's also a great question. Yeah, so we do handle quite a number of mergers or reorganizations. They're not always, formalized as a merger. But definitely we have seen a lot more of that since the COVID pandemic. I think a lot of smaller organizations are sort of rethinking their fundraising and thinking about, well, maybe, if we partnered with a larger organization, they could help us fundraise, they could, align with our mission so that we would be stronger together. So, we have seen a lot of that. I would say, especially more in 2020. I think in 2021, not as much, but I wouldn't say that's over. I would say a lot of organizations are really thinking about that, especially as the pandemic lasts a little bit longer than perhaps people originally anticipated.
Excellent. Our guest has been Valerie Sussman, legal counsel for philanthropy in the nonprofit sector with Hurwit and Associates. If people want to get in touch with you, want to talk to you a little bit more about either an idea they have or about their nonprofit formation, ongoing operations, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Sure, happy to have anyone reach out. So my email at Hurwit and Associates, it's V Sussman, so just my first initial, and then SUSSMAN at HurwitAssociates.com.
Our guest again has been Valerie Sussman of Hurwit Associates. It's been a pleasure having you on Radio Entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.